So good morning and welcome everybody to our first Cup of Joe session of the new year of 5780. And we are going to, in some ways, continue how we have with a lot of reading of the text and just talking about maybe on some levels the pshat understanding of things. But also I am working with a chavruta on learning through some sections of this book called Ichirei Torah, you'll see that they're relatively short teachings by various Hasidic rabbis, sages, and I'll bring in the ones that I find that are interesting. There's plenty of others that are okay, but not as compelling, and hopefully we've got a few good ones to start us off with today. So we've got, pass these out, we've got both Bereshit texts. We'll go back a little bit and look at a couple things in Bereshit, which we read this past week, and then Noach, which is coming up this week. So one of the things to make note of is that the translations are things that my chavruta and I are working on, his name's Mark Goodman. He and I were roommates for a couple of years in rabbinical school, and it's always interesting how things turn out. Shortly, a couple years after I left Pittsburgh, he and his family relocated to Pittsburgh. So he's there now. He's not. He's got a part-time pulpit up in Erie, but they moved there for his wife's medical residency. So it's just great for he and I to be able to reconnect. So some of the translations are things based on what we're doing. Others I'm trying to, for some of them to look online, especially if there's some words here and there that we're not quite getting, to see if we can find the sources in translation at all. Very few of them are. But sometimes somebody else has included something in a Devar Torah or something like that, and with a few key search words, I'm able to find some things. So when I'm able to find something, I'll try and make note of it. But also, I was thinking about it. This is the modern equivalent of what we called in rabbinical school a jastro bonus. So there's a dictionary for learning, working mostly through rabbinic texts, Talmud and all. Compiled by Jastro. It's his last name. I forget his first name. And sometimes when you're looking something up in Jastro, you come up with where he cites the thing that you're learning, right? So not always does he makes some sort of citations, but there's a lot of times in the Talmud that a word might come up. So if he happens to cite it, we say, oh, it was a Jastro bonus because it gives you more information and things like that. So if I'm able to, I'll find like a Google bonus or an internet bonus to if I actually find translations of some of these things online. Jastrow. Can't remember his first name, but and in fact that's online too. The Jastro dictionary is, you can find that online as well. It's a wonderful resource out there. Okay, page 3. Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz v'haaretz hayta tohu v'vohu v'choshech al pnei tahom v'ruach Elohim merachefet al pnei hamayim. When God began to create heaven and earth, the earth being unformed and void, with darkness over the surface of the deep, and a wind from God sweeping over the water. I always like to point out, and it's one of the things that I think, and sort of my eyes were opened more to through Rabbi Artsen's teachings. We so often talk about creation being something from nothing, right? Like God created the world out of nothingness. But that's not what the text tells us, right? The earth was unformed and void. It was there. There was something there. And then that gets shaped, it gets organized, it gets, in some ways brought into what we know of as the world.
What a cosmologist today would say, right?
Yeah, probably, right. I think there's a lot of connection between what we see in science and a sense that it wasn't, right. It wasn't something from nothing, but rather a continued journey of more and more and more organization, more and more order in the world. So it's really, starting straight from the beginning to see that kind of thing. Okay. I should have started with this. Let's make sure that everybody knows everybody, because we haven't all sat and learned together. You want to introduce yourself?
My name is Andy Krinsky.
Ben Berman.
George Hankins.
Barry Pell, originally from New Jersey.
Nice, Barry.
Edith Medal.
Lemmerman.
George Gitlitz.
Great. And, Andy was asking, is this, how long we've been doing this? It's really since I've gotten here. And before that, which is nice, right? So some people here have been sitting around these tables on Tuesdays morning for 22 years. It's a good routine to be in, and glad that you're all together with us. Andy, you want to go on and read starting verse 3? On page 4, like the last line of the top text.
Okay.
God said,
"Let there be light," and there was light. God saw that the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning, a first day.
Great. So we're going to have this regular cycle of activity where there's something created, something is made, and then end of the day, right? Also a common reframe of seeing that it's good, right? That something's good, and there's one day that we don't get it good, which is on day 2. So Andy, keep going. Top of the next page.
God said, "Let there be an expanse in the midst of the water, and that it may separate water from water." God made the expanse, and it separated the water which was below the expanse from the water which was above the expanse. And so it was so. God called the expanse sky, and there was evening, and there was morning, a second day.
Great. So no Tov here on the second day. Any thoughts of maybe why? Okay, well, let's read on and see.
God said, "Let the water below the sky be gathered into one area, that the dry land may appear." And it was so. God called the dry land earth, and the gathering of waters he called seas. And God saw that this was good.
Keep going.
And God said, "Let the earth sprout vegetation, seed-bearing plants, fruit trees of every kind on earth that bear fruit with the seed in it." And it was so. The earth brought forth vegetation, seed-bearing plants of every kind, and trees of every kind bearing fruit with the seed in it. And God saw that this was good. And there was evening, and there was morning, a third day.
Okay, so now that we've read the third day, why might there not have been a kitov on the second day? Well, what's happening on the second day? What's being created, or what's part of it? Right? Separating water from water, right? And then on the third day, let the water below the sky be gathered into one, right? So in some ways, God wasn't finished, right, with that particular aspect of creation on the second day. So it wouldn't have made sense to say, oh yeah, looking back on it, right, that's good. Right? It's not done yet. So we wait until the third day, and then there's 2 different categories. First it's water, and then it's vegetation. And therefore we end up getting 2 ketos in the on the third day. And there's some people that have a tradition, a custom of getting married on Tuesdays. because I mean, hopefully the same person doesn't have the tradition of getting married on Tuesdays, because we don't want them getting married that many times. But there is a tradition of having weddings on Tuesdays, because it's seen as a good day, right?
Being fruitful, is that it?
That's interesting, right? Connecting it to the first time of being not even being commanded to, but that being fruitful here. That's an interesting point.
Is it possible that there was no need for day or light or sun when he was working with the waters, but there was when he starts with vegetation?
Good. Okay, so now we're gonna see that in day 4, right? Which is an interesting thing, that that we're going to have light being created on the 4th day. I mentioned this a little bit this past week, but that first of all, we had light at the beginning, but then we have the creation of sun and moon and stars, which is where we get light from. So there was some other kind of light that was created on the first day, and then once there's vegetation, then there has to be sunlight, right? Again, as much as I try, doing it earlier in the year, but just got in my garden yesterday, right? And then you've got to start worrying, right? Is there enough light? Light we don't usually have to worry about, right? Is there enough light? Is there enough rain? So I was very happy when there was a really nice storm last night to give it that boost. Hopefully things will take. There's a few that I'm a little bit worried about, but you don't really need it until there's plants, right? And so it's an interesting thing that the light, that the sun, the moon, right, weren't created before the plants, but comes afterwards. So maybe there was a recognition of, oops, I've got these plants, and now I need the things that are necessary for them to be able to grow. Ben, you want to read that part, verse 14?
God said, "Let there be lights in the expanse of the sky to separate day from night. They shall serve as signs for the set times, the days and the years. And they shall serve as lights in the expanse of the sky to shine upon the earth." And it was so. God made the 2 great lights, the greater light to dominate the day, and the lesser light to dominate the night, and the stars. And God set them in the expanse of the sky to shine upon the earth, to dominate the day and the night, and to separate light from darkness. And God saw that this was good, and there was evening and there was morning, the 4th day.
Nice. So 2 different lights, and there's a lot of different teachings around how can there be 2 rulers, right? And then there's a midrash about the moon coming to God and saying, "What do you mean 2 rulers? You can only have 1 king." And God says, "Okay, make yourself smaller." And the moon says, "Well, that's not fair. That's not just because I pointed out a contradiction here. I'm the one who gets punished." And God says, "No, but you're going to rule over the night." The moon's still not happy, but that's more of the midrash. So the sun to rule by day, and the moon to rule at nighttime, and the sun to be counted for the days. Right? We count days by the sun, and in the Jewish calendar, we count the seasons and the months, the holidays by the moon. Right? So the moon gets that as a consolation prize, if you will. But again, even that, the moon's not that happy about. So that's, again, more of the midrash. I think we've done that another year. But here we have it. And again, always things that jump out at you at different times. Where it says the moon to dominate, or they are to dominate the day and the night, and to separate light from darkness. So that's an interesting thing, because God said back at the beginning on the first day, separating light from darkness. I'd have to explore that a little bit more, but it seems a little strange that phrase comes up again when the moon is supposed to bring light to to the nighttime. So it's not necessarily separating light from darkness, and we know that when the moon is out and the stars are out, you can see somewhat and sometimes fairly well. So it's an interesting thing to have that phrase a second time of separating light from darkness. Let's see if they say anything down below. I don't see anything. So, okay, go on, Ben, verse 20.
God said, let the waters bring forth swarms of living creatures and birds that fly above the earth across the expanse of the sky. God created the great sea monsters and all the living creatures of every kind that creep, which the waters brought forth in swarms, and all the winged birds of every kind. And God saw that this was good. God blessed them, saying, be fertile and increase, fill the waters in the seas, and let the birds increase on the earth. And there was evening and there was morning, a fifth day.
So here we have the fifth day of the animals.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Interesting that they seem to know that it started in the water.
Yes.
Yes.
And then later creatures, and also that we were not co-equal with all these other things that were being created, but we evolved later. They wouldn't have used the term
They used the
evolved.
naughty word.
Still,
Yeah, I know, they certainly wouldn't have
They
used
saw
that word,
that
but it's really,
separation,
really amazing, huh?
Yeah.
It's really incredible to see this in some ways parallel what we understand from science, what we know from science, yeah, I think it's really pretty impressive. And you know, you always have that question of it being divine, right? Well, you know, maybe that's something that's a proof for it, right? That to have given the people the insight that this was it. Now we see in chapter 2 a little bit of a different system of creation. So it's not across the board, but at least here we have it in a pretty systematic way compared to what we know. Okay, and go ahead, Ben, and finish out the 6th day.
God said, let the earth bring forth every kind of living creature, cattle, creeping things, and wild beasts of every kind. And it was so. God made wild beasts of every kind, and cattle of every kind, and all kinds of creeping things on the earth. And God saw that this was good. And God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness. They shall rule the fish of the sea, and the birds of the sky, the cattle, the whole earth, and all the creeping things that creep on earth. And God created man in his image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them. God blessed them, and God said to them, be fertile and increase, fill the earth and master it, and rule the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, and all the living things that creep on earth.
Keep going.
Yeah. God said, see, I give you every seed-bearing plant that is upon all the earth, and every tree that has seed-bearing fruit. They shall be yours for food. And to all the animals on land, to all the birds of the sky, and to everything that creeps on earth, in which there is the breath of life, I give all the green plants for food. And it was so. And God saw all that he had made and found it very good. And there was evening and there was morning the 6th day.
Okay, so here we have the conclusion of it, of the 6th day, and things are deemed to be very good at that point, and it includes then the creation of animals and human beings, all on the 6th day. So we'll go back to verse 26 and see one major question that comes up, and it's one that I've got here on our handout, is let us make man in our image, after our likeness. Who's the us and the our? Right? Who in the world is God talking to?
Could just be the royal we.
Good. That's one of the teachings that I didn't bring, right? It's exactly that. It's that royal we, right? That's just how people talk sometimes. And so maybe God is invoking that at this time. And I think that it was, as we call it, the royal we, right? Here, God as master, as king, as, right? Could certainly be seen in that place. Great. Any other ideas? Who's
But there's no question that he calls himself a he. She and it.
Well, yeah, I mean that's always an interesting conversation, and it's it's a chicken and the egg kind of a thing, right? Is it because of Hebrew, right? The constraints of Hebrew that there's only masculine and feminine, there isn't a neutral, or is it that it was done that way because of that the language evolved that way because of the sense of things being masculine or feminine, and God being in this case masculine. I just was listening to a podcast yesterday about brachot, about even just the first three words, right? Baruch atah Adonai, and trying to unpack that, and recognizing that built into it we have atah, which a lot of people struggle with, and sometimes there are those who are try and find a different formulation that either changes it to feminine sometimes. I've seen brucha at ya, right, which is a feminine language, or just tries to neutralize it anyway. And one of the comments that was made was that there could have just been another term for God that didn't use a masculine or a feminine form, and that wasn't done, right? So it gives us more things to struggle with, but it was sort of intentional probably. So we have that as God is masculine here, and so let's look and see what the Chumash gives us as a in our image, after our likeness. George, you want to read that in the commentary? The commentary on the page, nope, in the book, in the Chumash, down just underneath the text.
I think that George read.
Just underneath the Hebrew, it says, "In our image, after our likeness." Oh, wait, even on the column before, number 26. Let us make. I'm confusing everybody. Let us make. Oh, go ahead. In the left hand column, let us make.
I got it. Let us, the extraordinary use of the first person plural here evokes the image of a heavenly court in which God is surrounded by an angelic multitude. This is the Israelite version of the assemblies of pagan deities prevalent in the mythologies of the ancient world.
Okay, great. Okay, so in some ways, this comment here.
Politics began a long back.
What's that?
Politics.
Politics.
Began a long time.
Maybe. That God is surrounded by the angels, right? And is saying to the angels, "Let us make God in our image." That in some ways, and I'm going to use the term here, partnership, because it's going to come up in one of the teachings in a minute, that God's not doing this just by God's self, but with some support of the angels, at least when it comes to this point. And then there's lots of conversations where God says tells the angels that God's going to create humanity, and there's this debate. The angels saying God should or God shouldn't, and some of the issues that are going to arise if God creates humanity. And continuing the us language in the next column there. Actually, before you go to that, down below the line now, George. Let us make man in our image.
God said,
Do you see down below the line?
down.
Let us make man in our image.
Let us make man in our image.
There you go.
Commentators in every generation have puzzled over the plural language in this verse. The Midrash envisions God's consulting with the angels, perhaps hinting at a measure of divine ambivalence. Truth and peace oppose creating humans on the grounds that such creatures would surely be deceitful and contentious. Love and righteousness favor their creation. For without humanity, how can there be love and righteousness in the world? God sides with those favoring
Creation, right? So here's that conversation between the quote unquote angels, an angel of truth, an angel of peace, saying, forget it, right? They're gonna bring negativity, deceitful, contentious, right? Whereas love and righteousness, those angels are saying, create these guys, right? Because that's how we'll have love and righteousness in the world. So that's that conversation. Continue, George.
Or perhaps God was speaking to the animals. Together, let us fashion a unique creature in our image, yours and mine. A creature like an animal in some ways, needing to eat, to sleep, to mate, and like God, in some ways, capable of compassion, creativity, morality, and self-consciousness. Let the divine qualities manifest themselves in this culmination of the evolutionary process. Albo sees each animal species contributing its choicest quality to this new creature.
Okay, so who's God speaking to? God's speaking to the only things that are around. Right? Let us create man in our image, to the animals. Right? And what does it mean to be created in the image? What's that?
It's a cause.
A cause?
A cause. A clone, you have to have people in order to all the other things he talks about.
Oh, okay, to bring those about, right? So that the humanity then is a mixture of the animal kingdom and the divine realm. Right? That the animals having physical needs, eating, sleeping, mating, and then the divine ideals of compassion, creativity, morality, self-consciousness, right? And really, while we see animals building, doing beautiful things, the underlying sense is that's all, what's it called? It's an I. There's a word. I'm blanking on it. At least once a day that happens, right? It's internal, right? They know They know it. That's whether it's building a dam or a spider building a web. Instinct. Thank you. There you go. That it's instinct. That it's not creation. It's not creativity. Whereas human beings, as we know, right, have been able to create and bring about beautiful and new things. So really seeing that distinction between the animals and the rest of the animals and humanity.
It's interesting that we have this concept of God as not being just a big superhuman being, and
right.
A lot of times God is described as having a male side, a female side, and all kinds of attributes. So in that case, such a being could very well be a plural rather than a singular being.
Right. Yes, right. God, and we even saw that a little bit with the creation of man, that God created, them, right? Man, woman, them together. And there's Midrashim teachings about how they were androgynous, how it was two figures, sort of, if you will, Siamese back to back, and then until they were divided apart. So there's that plurality both around God and around human beings. Were you going to say something?
Well, actually, it's interesting, the concept of speaking to the animals and creating with them. That's actually very consistent with that posthumous book that of the Soloveitchiks, which is very controversial.
Oh, yeah?
Where he says what people have gotten away from is that in the Bible, man has both the godlike qualities and animal qualities. And theology got away from that in the Middle Ages. But that isn't. But if you read the Bible carefully, there's no such thing as life after death specifically mentioned.
Right,
People are animals,
Right, right.
in part, and they live and die in the same cycle.
Right, we have a beginning and an end.
Yeah.
Right. Interesting. Which book is that? Do you remember?
There, I don't know the title. It was found after Soloveitchik died.
Was it Lonely Man of Faith?
I don't remember the title, so
I don't remember the
I
teaching.
can't tell you, but
Right.
but it was very controversial because it was unlike his previous
Earlier
works
stuff. Right.
in concept.
Right.
But
So let's see, now that we've learned this a little bit on the handout, this text, which is, as you'll see, it says an anonymous sage quoted from Iturei Torah. It just says that down at the bottom of that, sort of in the middle of the two paragraphs, B'Shem Gadol Echad, right? In the name of some one great person, right? We don't it's sort of anonymous. So Barry, you want to read that in the box? Let us make man.
Let us make man. Let's first form a committee of assembled angels.
Okay, so first he quotes this text that that we've just seen, or a proof text of Bereshit Rabbah from the Midrash, that it's bringing together this committee. Why do they want to bring together a committee? Go ahead.
At the creation of apex predators, the wolf and the lion, the snake and the scorpion, there was no committee and no hesitation at all. But humankind is a creation that is totally exceptional.
Right, so we never saw this committee another time, right? And it's not like there weren't some questionable things, right? There's going to be a wolf, a lion, snake, scorpion, some things that can really bring some damage into the world. No hesitation. God does this by the divine self.
Could that be, have anything to do with the origin of the minion? Or does that come from someplace else?
snakes and lions.
I've never heard of that connection, but,
Committee.
you mean
As a
you mean a
committee,
committee of
yes.
having to come together and do creation?
Yeah.
Interesting, right? That God needed a heavenly committee to make man. We need a committee in order to praise God, to those types of things. That's an interesting question. Okay, finish it up there.
In one instance, humans could go as high as the sky, and in another they could be as low as the depths of the underworld. There is no boundary to humankind's greatness, and no limit to humankind's degradation.
So here we see that in some ways you're bringing together some of the things from this other teaching, as well as the roles of the animals, the things that they do in their animal way, and the divine. Human beings can. There's no limit to the greatness that human beings can do. Unfortunately, there's no limit to the destruction, the pain, the degradation, to where human beings can go to as well. And thus God wanting to if it's cover yourself, right? To have a little bit of cover by having a committee do this, as opposed to doing it just on by the divine self, that God creates human beings there. So I thought that was an interesting one, that sort of touches on some of the same things of some of these other ones, but brings it to a little bit of a different point. And then chapter 2, as I said, is a slightly different description of creation. Let's see where we're at time-wise. So we're going to go. Let's read through chapter 2 in its entirety, but then we're only going to really look at the first part, but I like to give you a sense of it.
What page are we on?
So we're on page 11. Edith, do you want to read?
Okay.
Okay. The heaven and earth.
The heaven and the earth were finished, and all their arrived. On the seventh day, God finished the work that he had been doing, and he ceased on the 7th day from all the work. From all the work that he had done.
Good.
And God blessed the 7th day and declare it holy, because on it God ceases from all the work of creation that he had done. Such is the story of heaven and earth when they were created.
So in some ways, this is a conclusion of chapter 1, and we know that the chapters are not a Jewish construct, but so it sort of, they don't always make sense as to where they break. That really seems like a conclusion of chapter 1. We're going to keep going now for the rest of chapter 2, and then we'll come back to this little section again. You want to go on, Edith?
Mm-hmm.
Top of the next page.
When the Lord God made earth and heaven, when no scrap of the field was yet on earth, or no grasses of the field had yet sprouted, because the Lord God had not sent rain upon the earth, and there was no man to till the soil. But a flood would well up from the ground and water the whole surface of the earth. The Lord God formed man from the dust of the earth. He blew into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living being. The Lord God planted a garden in Eden, the east, and placed there the man whom he had formed. And from the ground the Lord God caused to grow every tree that was pleasing to the sight, and God for food, with the tree of life in the middle of the garden, and the tree of knowledge of God and bad. A river issued from Eden to water the garden, and it then died and became 4 branches. The name of the first is Pishon, the one that went through the whole line on Havilah, where the gold is. The gold of that land is gold, bdellium is there, and lapis lazuli. The name of the second river is Gihon, the one that went through the whole land of Cush. The name of the third river is Tigris, the one that flows east of Ashur, and the fourth river is the Euphrates.
Okay, so Euphrates. So this is giving a little sense of the geography of things. Whether things are exactly as we know of them today is a question, but we have some sense of where this is. Len, you want to continue?
The Lord God took the man and placed him in the Garden of Eden to till it and tend it. And the Lord God commanded the man, saying, of every tree of the garden you are free to eat, but as for the tree of knowledge of good and bad, you must not eat of it, for as soon as you eat of it, you shall die. The Lord God said, it is not good for man to be alone. I will make a fitting helper for him. And the Lord God formed out of the earth all the wild beasts and all the birds of the sky, and brought them to the man to see what he would call them. And whatever the man called each living creature, that would be its name. And the man gave names to all the cattle, and to the birds of the sky, and to all the wild beasts. But for Adam no fitting helper was found. So the Lord God cast a deep sleep upon the man, and while he slept, he took one of his ribs and closed up the flesh at that spot. And the Lord God fashioned the rib that he had taken from the man into a woman. He brought her to the man. And then the man said, this one at last is bone of my bones, the flesh of my flesh. This one shall be called woman, for from man she was taken. Hence a man leaves his father and mother and clings to his wife, so that they become one flesh.
There you go. Okay, so again, now the next line, shows a chapter break that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So we're going to leave that last line from chapter 2 alone. So here's a different kind of creation story where it is man is created first, placed in the garden, and then God realizing, man needs all these other animals as well. The vegetation is there beforehand, really, or almost simultaneously with man. But it's, the garden is created basically for the purpose of putting man into it, humanity in there. and then and we have some distinctions as to the role humanity is supposed to play based on first story versus second story. The first one is to fill the land and control it, and here the role is to till and to tend, much more of a nurturing sense for humanity's role. Going back to the first line in chapter 2, the heaven and earth were finished and all their array. This is from a section that we say every Friday night. We say it both as part of our evening service as well as Kiddush on Friday night. Right? And so this was I really liked this next teaching on the backside of the Bereshit handout from Oznaim LaTorah, and we'll see where he takes us. George, go ahead.
Rav Hamnuna said, every person that prays on Shabbat evening, Vayachulu raises upon himself what is written, as if we are partners with God in the works of creation.
Okay, so this is from the Talmud, from Masechet Shabbat 119, and saying that this section and saying this prayer means that we're linking ourselves to God and seeing ourselves as partners with God in creation. And now he's going to show what problem is with that. What do you think the problem is before we even get to it, if you haven't looked yet? What's the problem with us being partners with humanity, being partners of God in creation?
Man is the last thing created.
Man's the last thing created, right? Okay, so how can you say we were partners? It's already done. And that's what he's going to point out in the first thing. Go ahead.
Well,
Go ahead, George.
That's only creation, a very literal sense of making things. I mean, there's obviously lots of things being created every day.
There's more things to come.
Yeah.
Yes.
Or maybe
Good.
you want to be able to share the blame if anything.
Good. So
There's too.
right. So I like that, Ben. Right. Absolutely. Right. We're partners, and this I spoke about. Forget which sermon now, right? But I spoke about the role that we have as partners in creation, yes, I think that's actually absolutely true. We're going to see here another aspect of it. Go ahead, George.
God wanted to partner with the precious people in creation of the world, but how would he partner when there was no efforts and things to do? This is after everything was complete, and only because of rest was Shabbat, the completion of the works of heaven and earth. Therefore, the words of the sages are, what was the world lacking? Rest. When Shabbat came, rest came. And for the rest of Shabbat, we are capable to have rest like the Creator. And therefore, one who rests on Shabbat as a mitzvah and recites Vayachulu believes that they are completing creation. They are a partner with God. Okay.
So you have to take a nap.
You have to take a nap, right? Right? Taking a nap on Shabbat is a mitzvah, right? It indicates, it shows how we're partners with God, right? That without menucha, without rest, the rest of the world wouldn't have been, creation wouldn't have been complete. We have a role in doing that, whether it's what comes on Sunday, right? As humanity, as man, then picks up from where the Creator left off, or in partnership with the Creator, or whether it's that sense of menucha, which we know the world needs, right? And in so many different ways, and we see it throughout the Torah of letting our servants go after 7 years, and letting the land rest every 7 years, and certainly Shabbat for us, and so important is that, or so influential is that we're blessed to have weekends, right? And I'm sure people don't take advantage of it in the same way that it's necessarily intended, of really refreshing and recharging. But we have that ability with Shabbat. Okay, we're going to skip through the rest of Bereshit and go to Noach, so we get a teaser going into this next week. We know things don't turn out so well after creation. There's that whole story about the tree and the eating of the fruit, and Adam and Eve are banished from the garden, and they have children, Cain and Abel, and that doesn't work out so well. Cain kills Abel, and the world is full of by the end of the parsha, the world is full of wickedness. Right? I'm looking back quickly on page 34. The Lord saw how great was man's wickedness on earth, and how every plan devised by his mind was nothing but evil all the time. Nothing but evil. That's it, right? And this goes to that first teaching that I brought about how there's no limit to humankind's degradation. There's no limit to the evil and wickedness that they can bring about. God regretted that he had made man on earth. Right? I should have listened to those other angels. Right? And was saddened, which is very powerful, giving God these emotions. I think one thing of being sad, like, okay, sadness is in some ways dealing with the present and moving forward. I think regret is really saying I made a mistake, right? And that's very powerful for me, thinking of God as learning and evolving. Again, going back to process with Rabbi Artson. So then the beginning of Noah starts off the same way. This is the line of Noah. Noah was a righteous man. He was blameless in his age. Noah walked with God. Noah begot 3 sons. I'm sorry, on page 41. I'm sorry, I jumped ahead. Page 41. The earth became corrupt before God. The earth was filled with lawlessness. Verse 12, when God saw how corrupt the earth was, for all flesh had corrupted its ways on earth, God said to Noah, I have decided to put an end to all flesh, for the earth is filled with lawlessness because of them. I am about to destroy them with the earth. And then it goes on, make for yourself a ark of gopher wood, and all the descriptions of it, bring in the animals, and we are fairly familiar with that story. So I brought some texts of rabbis basically asking the question, why now? What was it? What point did they reach that God finally had to say, okay, I'm taking action? And so we've got 3 texts, short texts here on the front, and then a longer one on the back. So one explanation, one thing is they've reached their sins to the limit, to the very last possibility of a person's power to sin. Right? This is it. They couldn't have gotten any worse, and so I have to act on it. And so that's one explanation as to why at that point why they didn't wait any longer. Next one, I watched and took note of each of them until their final generation, and I saw that there would not come from any of their seed a tzaddik. Right? God looking into the future, right? Looking at all the people that were around at that point, and down the line, and saying, you know what? None of them are going to amount to anything. None of them and none of their offspring. Generation after generation after generation. And so now's the time to start over with somebody, Noah, who is a ish tzaddik tamid v'dorotav, right? Is a righteous person in his generation. Who knows if that's if it was because of Noah's merit, or I think another way to read this is somebody from Noah's offspring, right? Everybody else, God looks at and says, none of them are going to amount to much. But somebody right, down the line from Noah will. And I think that one teaching that we have, or one understanding we have, is that why do we have a chair for Elijah at every Brit Milah? And I would say at every baby naming, right? It should be, right, for boys or for girls, because there's that sense that each child that comes into the world could be or should be seen as the one, right? The messianic figure, the one who's able to really create a world that measures up to what the divine was envisioning.
Does God take any responsibility for having created all this evil?
Well, I mean, I think from this point of view of that sense of regret, I think that's where we really get that sense of ownership for it. Like, oh yeah, I did this, and now I've got to fix it. And the way to do that, certainly according to this one, is to say, let's only leave out there the one line that could bring about a change of this, and that's Noah. And I like the idea. I mean, I think we're still in a universalist. I always stumble on that. Universalistic. I don't know. I always stumble on that view of things, right? That this isn't saying it's got to come from the Jews, right? It's that it's going to come from the Israelites who are bringing this text to us, right? But it could come from anyone still. It comes from B'nai Noach, right? When we talk about the roles that B'nai Noach, that the children of Noah play in the world, and so I like that it's coming now, right, and not from Abraham, right? It's not Abraham who starts things back off again. It's Noah, and that opens up that everybody is integral and possible to bring about this goodness. So that's the second one. The third one here says Kuf Tzadik. If you look in the Hebrew, the Hebrew is Kates Kol Basar Ba Lefanai, right? That in verse 13, it says, right, that I've just, where is it in translation? I've decided to put an end to all flesh, for the earth is filled with lawlessness. So that's Kuf Tzadik. It says here that it's an acronym for Koltsum. Koltsum, the voice of the fast. And what does this mean? Admittedly, we cried and afflicted ourselves, but it was God's decree. However, all this is not helpful for offenses between a person and his friend. So what I got from this, right, especially now having just passed Yom Kippur, and thinking about the Haftarah on Yom Kippur, where Isaiah says, "Is this the fast that I desired?" Right. So you can imagine the people at the time of Noah. There's different accounts as to what they do in response to seeing him build this ark and him saying, "Oh, God's gonna destroy the world." But at some point, at least when the rains start coming down and they realize they're in bad shape, they're going to cry out. They're going to have their own fast. They're going to afflict themselves in some way, asking for forgiveness. And it says, no, that it doesn't work, because they are only thinking about the relationship between themselves and God, and they're not dealing with the fact that this lawlessness is between people. Whereas really the issue is the way that they're treating one another. And so you can cry out to God as much as you want, but that doesn't fix the fact or change the fact that you've been abusing somebody else, right? That you've been really acting in negative ways between people. So we can have your fasts and you can do your chest beating, but how does it change how you're interacting with other people? The last text on the backside, down at the bottom. I've decided to put an end to all flesh, and this one Mark did a lot of the translation for. These ones oppress those ones, and those ones oppress these ones. So it starts off by saying that there's all this oppression going on during this time, and most people or everyone is involved in it. These ones oppress those ones with financial violence, and those ones oppress these ones with violence of actions. So there's different ways that people are oppressing one another. It could be financially, or it could be through your actions. Even the greats and the righteous that are amongst us. So that text was from Bereshit Rabbah, from the Midrash of Bereshit Rabbah. Then he goes on. Even the greats and the righteous that are amongst us, those that are deep in introspection, they have no idea how to grasp the depths and perceive and pierce the elusive mysteries of the concept of the deliverance of divine punishment. Right? So here's the question: these people, as we saw we see with Abraham as well, that they see this collective punishment. Right? God is wiping out everybody. Maybe there's some people that aren't so guilty. Maybe there are people who haven't done all that much, but yet everybody gets destroyed. And he's saying nobody understands that, right? And that's still a struggle that I think we all have. The violent do violence, and the bandits commit banditry. So he's saying that's this natural way of some of these people, that they're just going to act this way. Right? They're violent, and they do these acts. And divine punishment punishes both the perpetrator and the victim. Right? We're not understanding why that would happen. The robber and the robbed. Why is this? Because the one that was robbed cries out too much, he says, towards this divine punishment. Right? That somebody who was affected, who was damaged by somebody doing violence, there's a tendency to want to exact retribution, to cry out, right? Whether it's in a divine court or whether it's in a human court, right? For that person really to be punished. And as the violent are punished for their financial violence, so too is punished the one that is the victim of violence for visiting retribution in the form of action. Right? That somebody who was the victim, right, and wanting this retribution, they're seen as now as a perpetrator as well. You have permission and obligation to cry out against an injustice that's done to you, but to a fitting degree, without revisiting the punishment 100-fold. Right? So we want, as we say, right, the punishment to fit the crime. But oftentimes, right, it truly doesn't. Right? If you can imagine, this was an example that Mark came up with. Like, imagine somebody strikes me, somebody hurts me. They, God forbid, they shoot me, right, and they damage my arm. Right? At some point, my hand heals, right, and within a year or 2 years, whatever else, God willing, I'd be back at work and I'd be, being able to continue my life, right? But that person might be in jail for, I don't know, our legal system, right, for 5 years, for 10 years, whatever else, right? And is there an equity, right, at that point? I've gone on with my life. This person isn't allowed to, and maybe that it should be more of an equal thing. Such is it that you need to find a point of humanity in the one that has harmed you with their evil deeds or speech. And we just saw this a couple weeks ago, the case with the police officer. I think, is it in Dallas, right? Somewhere in Texas, right? She goes into the wrong apartment, thinks that there's an intruder in there, and shoots the person. It's not her apartment, right? And she's after the trial, the brother of the deceased, right, gets on the stand and talks about the love that he has for her and wants to give her a hug and the compassion. And that's what it's talking about here, right? That you need to find a point of humanity in the one that's harmed you with their evil deeds or speech. Even the one that does an injustice to you must be seen as your brother. Right? That this is the point that it got to with these times, where that the people who were being harmed couldn't see any good in the people that were perpetrating the violence. And maybe not everybody, right? The land was full of lawlessness. Maybe it really wasn't everybody was doing these evil, wicked things, but the response that the people had was not compassionate either. Right? And I think we're again still struggling with this kind of a thing. And trying to figure out what does it mean to exact punishment, to hold somebody accountable, but also to see somebody as going back to the initial, as B'Tselem Elohim, as created in God's image, and still being our brother even after these acts.
Even Trump.
Should I pause this? I'm going to pause this before we start that conversation.
So was Noah perceived to be perhaps the only righteous person?
Right, at that point, right, that maybe there was, if we go to bring this to why Noah is, well, maybe Noah had that compassion, right? Maybe Noah was trying to see the good in the others, even as hard as it might have been. So yeah, I mean, I think that's you have to take that step from this text to why Noah, but yeah, I think there's a piece of that.
It took a long time before the development of the explanations
Yes.
of men's behavior and what to do about it.
You're saying that these texts come a long time after the Torah itself. Yes, I mean this is.
Yes.
I didn't jot down who this was. This is
Solomon.
the altar. Shoot, I'm blanking on his name. Of Slabotka, I think it's called. And he lived in the early, I think it's the early 20th century. So yeah, it's a long time, right? If it's not 20th, it's 19th. I forget now. So yeah, some of these teachings. That's why we continue to have these conversations, right? Because it's not all stuff that was going to come into people's minds 1,000 years ago or so, and we need to keep churning it out as well. To who knows, 1,000 years from now, people will be reading some of the things that are being talked about these texts today, and saying, "Wow, why did it take them so long to understand that?" This was one that Mark and I thought was really quite powerful. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Till next week.